Chag Sameach, everybody.
Chag Sameach, Kavod Rav. How are you?
Baruch Hashem.
Chag Sameach. Rabbi, don't forget Facebook.
Okay, thank you. Okay. 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 Okay, looks like we're up to hay. Okay. So it says here, the yad nitamet b'shifshu chaverta. So that which we said yesterday, you should know. He says that when we said that one hand is defiled by rubbing it with the other, dafka kishenatal yado echad. That's when he washed one hand, and then he rubbed it with the other hand. But im ratza litol b'tchilat shtei yadav kechad, but if you wanted to wash in the beginning two hands together, you can do that. Why is that? Because now they're considered to be like one hand, both of them. And they don't defile one the other. That's what it says in Rabbeinu Shimshon, Rosh. Perek Bet Masechet Yadayim, over there in the second perek of Yadayim. Mishnash, it says in Mishnah, Mishniyot, Kemo Shechtov Besamuch. So I'm going to write this close by. So also we have to say that regarding what we explained at the end of the chapter Kuf Samech of 160, we already said that 5 people can wash one besides the other together, like in one shot, or one on top of the other. But so the reason is because they're considered to be like one hand. Okay. That's what it says in Rambam. Otam Mishnah, regarding that Mishnah. V'chen katav gam ken al haditnan. Also, that's what it says in the Rambam regarding what we learned in the Mishnah. Perek bet. L'shtei yadav mishtifa echad. You can do 2 hands with one washing. Rabbi Meir metameh. Rabbi Meir says doesn't become purified like that. עד שיטול מרביעית, until he washes from מרביעית. בהלכתא כתנא קמא, so that'll chazak the first opinion. אשר יאמר, כי אפילו היו שתי ידיו משטיפה אחד, which says that even if there was two hands with one washing, יצא, he fulfills obligation, ורחץ מים ראשונים כמצוותן. So that means that he did the first washing in the proper manner. וכן כתב בפרק י"א בהלכות כמקוואות. That's what it says also in מקוואות. וזה לשונו, this language of the מקוואות. וזה נטל שתי ידיו משטיפה אחד. Let's say he washed two hands with one washing, with one pouring. הרי אלו טהורים, so they are pure the hands. ואין אומרים הרי זה נוטל ידו אחד במים שירדו מעל ידי השנייה. So we don't say that this is like somebody washes one hand with water that came from the other hand. אפילו ירדו חמישה זה בצד זה, even if it was five of them, one besides the other, או זה על גב זה, or one on top of the other, בלבד שירפו ויבואו מהם המים. As long as they're loose, right, there's enough room there for the water to get in. Okay. וגם רבנו כתב בסימן זה, so he says, רבנו also wrote in this chapter, יוחז הכלי בראשי אצבעותיו, he should hold the vessel, right, with the fingertips, וישפוך על שתי ידיו כאחד, and he should wash, he should pour on both hands together, וגם המורכי כתב פרק אלו דברים, מורכי also says, הנותן מידו אחד על חברתה, if he puts from one hand to the other, אסור, that's going to be forbidden, וטוב להיזהר לשפוך על שתיהן בבת אחת. So therefore he says, the proper thing to do is to wash both of them in one shot. And so this way you won't have this problem. Okay, so we're talking here about, somebody who has like limited water. Because of that, there's a restraint going on here, right? So, he's got to be careful. He can't use too much. He doesn't have. So because of that, he's trying to, maximize his efficiency. That's what we're saying over here. Okay, so but Baruch Hashem, we don't have these problems today, but it's good to know anyway, just in case. You never know. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So it says Shulchan Aruch, hey, מתוך מה שכתבנו יתבהר לך, says that from that which we wrote already, last time, you're going to understand that which we said, right? That one hand becomes impure by rubbing it with the other. That means he's washing one hand, and then he rubbed it with the other hand. So this is no good, right? We don't want that. אבל אם רצה ליטול בתחילה שתי ידיו כאחד, if he tried to do two hands in one shot from the outset, נוטל, so that he could do. שתיהן נחשבות כיד אחד. Why is that? Now both of them are considered to be like one hand, since he's doing it in one shot. ואינן מתמאות זה את זה, they don't defile one the other. ואפילו דל או שהניחו ידיהם זה בצד זה, even if you have 4 or 5 people, one besides the other, right, as we already mentioned before, ואפילו דל או שהניח, או זה על גב זה, or one on top of the other, כי יד אחד תחשיבו, this considered like one hand. So when you do one pouring, right, that's the way you save this problem, you get rid of the problem. Okay, good. So then he goes on. Okay, we said this. Now he says, so therefore they don't defile one the other. So this is the way to do it, for a person who has limited amount of water. He wants to do, kill 2 birds with one stone, as they say, right? So how do you do that? by washing both hands together in one shot. So this way, we won't have the issue of one hand defiling the other hand. Okay, interesting. So I guess we'll go to Vav. Unless you have any questions here. These are very technical things, like very, fine points over here. Your daily routine, you're not going to usually encounter things like this, but yeah. So going back to the tour, it says over here, "V'dash od shanino berk bet v'mesechet yadayim." So we also learned in the second parak of Yadayim, natal et harishonim liado echad. Let's say he he poured the first water on one hand, and then he kind of like switched gears, and the second pouring he did on both hands. So now they're impure. So this was not the proper way to do it. Let's say he washed the first hands, the first pourings, for both hands, and then he changed gears again. He then on the second time that he poured, he just did it on one hand. So here his hands are pure. This is the language of the tour. So comes Bet Yosef and says, the Rosh explains, he washed the first time with one hand. But Tosefta, it's in Tosefta, he says, Perek Bet, Mefaresh lo shala shelo natal ki im yado echad. It doesn't mean that he only washed one hand. Ela, rather, it's talking about a case where he washed both hands, right? One by itself and one by itself. And then when he did the second time, then one hand touched the other. Then he poured it out on both of them in one shot. So here his hands are impure. Why? Because when he combined one hand with the other, to receive the second pouring, so what happened was that now the hands became impure because they touch each other. Because what happens is that the water which is on this one defiles the water which is on the other one. So he says, just like, also the hand, just like that they defile the truma, a loaf which is made out of truma, and also whatever they touch, like it says in Le'el Kishenatal et Taishnim, that says that if you wash the second time, lo tiaru et tarishonim, it didn't purify the first pouring, kivan shenitmet mechamat chaberta, because it became impure defiled because of the other hand. Ela adraba. So this is on the contrary. Gama shneim nitmeu. What happened was the second one is also defiled. The second pouring, mehen from them, b'tzarich lenagev yadav v'litol shtehen be'echad ke'echad. So he says, how do you solve the problem? You gotta, you have to first dry your hands and then wash both of them in one shot. But if he washed the first time, the two hands, it's considered like one. Then the two hands are considered like one. And they don't defile one the other. Also, these rabbis explain the same way. Sham, over there. Katav dinim elu samag. So Samag writes these halachot. והרמב"ם כתבם בפרק י"א בהלכות מקוואות. And the Rambam also writes them in the laws of מקוואות. אבל פרק ו' בהלכות ברכות לא כתב דבר מזה, but he says in the laws of blessings he didn't write anything about this. When you so he says it seems like the reason is why, מפני שהוא סבור, because he holds שלא הוזכרו מים שניים לאכילת חולין, because we never discussed doing the second water for the for eating mundane foods. According to Rambam, that doesn't exist. Only for truma. Like we already proved, he says in chapter 160. So he says, nevertheless, right? It's a wonder why, because havale lemichtav ha the natal yada echad. He should have written the case where he washed one hand, and then he rubbed it with the other. It's impure. Because that's also relevant regarding chulin, regarding mundane foods. So it says furthermore, the natalat harishonim liado echad, that he washed the first time one hand, and then the second time he did both. Yadav to be able, so then they're impure, the hands. Bechulin, when it comes to mundane foods, nami shaycha, it also applies to mundane foods as well. For instance, let's say the first time you did less than revit, and at that point, right, the hands are not clean yet because the water is impure. Until he does revi'it on the hand. So you cannot say over here that just like he holds that you don't need second pouring the Rambam, the lechulin for mundane foods. He says he also holds the same thing, that we're not concerned. They washed one hand and then he rubbed it with the other. Also, we're not concerned if he did the first time on one hand, and then he did with the second hand, the second time two hands, both hands. So it's because these impurities were only mentioned for truma. But when it comes to mundane foods, so then we're not particular about these things. Because he writes in the laws of blessings that he has to raise his hands above until the water doesn't go out of the out of the area of the limb. And then it's going to come back and defile the hands. So you see from there that he is concerned about eating mundane foods, למים שנטמא בידיים, regarding food which, the water which was defiled by the hands. ויצאו חוץ לפרק שלא יחזרו ויטמאו את הידיים. So he says then they're going to come out further, right, go past the joint, and then they shouldn't come back to defile the hands. דלקה למימה שאין טעמו שם מפני שנטמאו המים. So we cannot say that the reason over there is because the water became impure בידיים דחולין, with the hands, because for mundane foods, we're not particular about these things, according to Rambam, right? So he says, then what's the reason, according to this? It's because the water became impure because the filth which is on his forearm. Like it says in the Aruch, הוא בעצמו כתב פרק א' מהלכות מקוואות, because he himself wrote in the 11th פרק of מקוואות, נטל הראשונים והשניים מחוץ לפרק, that if you wash the first time, second time, outside the joint, beyond the joint, וחזרו לידו, and they came back on his hand, נטמאת ידו, his hand becomes impure, שהמים הראשונים שחוץ לפרק נטמאו. Why? Because the first pouring, which went out of the beyond the limb, beyond the joint, became impure. Mechamat yadav, because of his hands. So he says the second pouring does not purify the water, which is water which is outside the joint, beyond the joint. So he says, and because the water returned, which water? Which is out beyond the joint, to his hands, which are impure. I'm sorry, to his hands, they're impure. So he says, you see from his words, so he says the impurity of the water is not because of the forearm, ela mechamat din mayim shniyim savar Rambam. It's because that the second pouring, the Rambam holds that lo tzarich, you don't really need it, ela b'truma, only with truma. כמו שהוכחתי בסוף סימן קוף סמך. So that we prove this in chapter 160. מכל מקום דינים הללו לאכילת חולין נמי יתנהו. So he says, nevertheless, these rules also apply to eating mundane foods. שאם נטל ידו אחד בשפשפה בחברתה, because if he washed one hand and then rubbed it with the other, טמאה, it's impure. וכן אחד שחלק על הרביעית לשניים. And since שחילק בין מרביעית לשניים, since he divided up the water of the רביעית to two parts, ויצאו מים ראשונים חוץ לפרק, and the first pouring went beyond the joint, וחזרו לטמאת היד, and now it returned, right? They returned, and the hand became impure. ולא חשש להאריך בהם בפרק ו'. So he says he didn't really want to speak at length over there in that chapter 6, Milchot Brachot, laws of blessings. Because he wanted to rely on what he wrote in the laws of Mikvaot. So he says also there, he is also kind of like complaining that they were taught in the Mishnah. Because he alluded to them in the laws of blessings. Regarding what he wrote, that the water did not go, they should not go beyond the joint, and then they're going to come back and defile the hands. Okay, this one is like big. So let's see what we can do. This goes, okay, almost to the end. Okay. So it continues here. מה שכתב רבנו שהשופך רביעית כאחד, אין צריך מים שניים. We already said, right, that if he washes רביעית in one shot, so then you don't need a second pouring. We already mentioned this several times. The Taram to purify them. כן כתבו בתוספות, תוספות, that's what it says in תוספות ק"ז עמוד א', והראש של הראש בפרק כל הבשר, והמורדכי בפרק אלו דברים. And also the מורדכי and this פרק אלו דברים. והביאו ראיה לדבריהם, so it says they brought a source for their words, מדתנן, from what that which we learned in the Mishnah, בפרק ב' במסכת ידיים, in the second perk of ידיים, נטל לידו אחד, if he washed one hand, משטיפה אחד, from one pouring, ידו טהורה, so his hand is pure, לשתי ידיו משטיפה אחד, if he did two hands with one pouring, Rabbi Meir מטמא, so Rabbi Meir says he's impure. Actually, told me Revit until he washes from Revit. He has to have Revit at the outset of each one. וכן כתב גם כן הרמב"ם. So it says the Rambam writes the same thing בהלכות ברכות, laws of blessings. יש לנוטל ליתן על ידיו מעט מעט. So he says the one who's washing his hands can pour little by little עד שייתן כשיעור, until he gets to the level that, you know, the quantity that we need. ואם נתן הרביעית כולה בשטיפה, so he says if he put רביעית when he washes his hands, אחד כשר, then it's fine, as we said, right? That's good enough as is. ונראה שהטעם לפי שעשו רביעית בבת אחד, so it says, seems like the reason is because they made רביעית in one shot, in one pouring, כמו טבילה שאינה צריכה, it's like immersion which is not necessary, שטיפה, you don't need to have washing, pouring, שתי פעמים, two times, כמו שכתבו סמ"ג והמורדכי בשם התוספתא, like it says in these name of these rabbis, אבל מדברי הרב"ד שכתב הכל בו, but according to this, right, the Ravad, who says the name of the Kolbo, נראה שאם שפך רביעית בבת אחד, it seems like if he poured out רביעית in one shot, על ידיו לא מהנה וזה לשונו, so that will not work. And this language, שאלו הראשונים מים ראשונים מטהרים. שאלו הראשונים מים ראשונים מטהרים. Right, so they asked the question, does the first pouring purify or not? את הידיים, מים ראשונים מטהרים. So the answer is, right, that the second one purifies. והמים של הידיים, ואחר שהמים, but the water which is on the hands, ואחר שהמים הראשונים מקבלים, and after that the first pouring receives טומאה, receives impurity, מן הידיים, היח השניים מטהרים. So then how does the second one purify? המים, the water, שעל הידיים, which is on the hands, ויחזרו הראשונים שהם טמאים ויטמאו את הידיים. And then returns the first pouring, which is impure and defiles the hands. והשניים מקבלים עוד טומאה, so it says then the second pouring receives another, right, impurity מן הידיים, from the hands, ואין להם טהרה לעולם, so they never get purified at all. שהרי אמרו שמא יצאו המים חוץ לפרק, because the rabbi said, right, we're concerned that the water will go beyond the wrist, ויחזרו ויטמאו את הידיים, and it's going to come back and defile the hands. עלמא הראשונים מקבלים טומאה מן המים, so you see from there that the first pouring does receive impurity from the water, שחוץ לפרק, which is outside the joint, and then they defile them. So it says, I say that the main impurity of the hands, it's not really impurity, it's just like dirty. Because it was touched by sweat, right, or excrement. Oh, or he killed some kind of a louse. And they decreed impurity on them. From that dirt, like they touched impurity. And that which I said, that the first, right, pouring purifies the hands. Moridin mahem azia. That means that it removes the sweat from them. And the dirt, because they are impure from there. And then the second part comes and rinses that water, which is diluted from the sweat, perspiration. Says because the dirt which is on the hands, so this is the reason why you got to stop in the first washing. Because if you give the whole Revit in one shot, even though they do remove the filth on his hands. So it says, nevertheless, those which remain on the hand, because of the remnant of the blotting out hand. So it says, therefore, you need to you have to stop with them. The second water. They wash off the erasure. And that which is going to remain on the hand, whatever is clean, that's called dirt. So they were concerned that maybe the water will go out. Second pouring will go outside the joint. And so they are already blotted out from that place, Shem Rishonim, which is the first. So then he comes back and defiles the hands into right, the impurity of the dirt. Rav says, therefore, you have to raise up your hands with the second water when you pour the second time. That's the way it seems to me, says. Okay, so just two more lines here in this paragraph here. Looking toward the Bayit, it says, he holds the Rashba that even if you put Revi'it in one shot, you still have to wash the second time. So there is a machloket about this, right, between the Rambam and the Rashba. Okay. All right, maybe we should just go on and finish this. Let's see what we can do. So it says, that which Rabbeinu said, right, the tour, that afterwards he should, then he can rub them. It implies that when you do wash your hands, you do have to rub them. וכן כתב הרמב"ם פרק י"ד בהלכות מקוואות. That's what the Rambam says also. לא זה מקוואות. הנוטל ידיו צריך לשפשף. He says you have to rub them. וכן כתב הכלבו, also כלבו בשם רבד, name רבד. וכן כתב הסמ"ג, so it says בשם התוספות, all these rabbis say the same thing. וגם הרמב"ם כתב בהקדמת מסכת ידיים. So it says the Rambam also wrote in the introduction to the hands, הוא כבר נתבהר בתוספתא, it was already explained in תוספתא, he says, כי הנוטל ידיו צריך לשפשף, that when you wash your hands, you do have to rub them, שיחכך קצתם בקצתם, that means like, rub them one against the other, ורבנו שמשון כתב, ורבנו שמשון says, תוספתא זו, בפרק ב', he wrote this תוספתא in second פרק, מסכת ידיים, וזה לשונו, and this is the language of the, וזה לשונה, and this her language. Okay, so let's go on. Rabbeinu Shimshon, one second, I'm sorry. Right. Yeah, so it says Rabbeinu Shimshon katav et Tosefta zo. It says Rabbeinu Shimshon this Tosefta. Perek bet, the Masechet Yadayim. V'zeh lashono, hanotel yadav, he says like this, one who washes his hands, tzarich l'shafshefa shifshefa, he has to rub them, and if he rub them b'chaverta, one against the other, tamea, right, it's going to be impure, berosho or bekotel tehora. But if he did it on his head or on the wall, it's going to be pure. Chazar v'naga b'hem tamea. If he came back by and washed them again, it's impure. U'peresh tzarich l'shafshef klomar. So explains that you have to rub them, meaning to say that l'kaneach mayim she'ala yadav, to rub the mayim which is on the water which is on his hand, b'mapa with a towel, or b'shar devarim, or some other things. Kedamin pek come the sotah. Like we said in the first pek of sotah. Kol ha'ochel pat below niguv yadayim. Whoever eats bread without drying his hands, kilu ochel lechem tameh. It's like he's eating impure bread. Shifshuf lashon kinuach. So he says, shifshuf means rubbing, right? Who call ki deresh pek amar lahem emune. Because this piece where it says in the perek of Yoma Chavtet Amud Bet, Zot omeret mitzvat teshafshef. It says also there that it's a mitzvah to rub. V'sof perek Yom Kippurim, at the end of this perek Yoma, mi be'erev yishafshef u'b'shalo natal ki im harishonim. So he says in the evening you have to rub them, and if he didn't wash his hands, only the first time. It's talking about that case. The natal et shniim, because if he did wash the second time, hechi katan sefa, then how does it teach at the end? B'shafshef berosh, that he rubs it on his head. Chazar v'naga ben tebiyah. So then if he comes back to touch him again, she's impure. Tiharu shniim et harishonim. So what happened over here? The second one pouring, right, purified the first one. Shal gabe ayad, which is on the hand. Because the katane matnitin miu says, like our Mishnah teaches, umiu efshar l'shafshef l'shifshuf. So it says, however, it's possible that you always require baya leolam to rub the hands. Ad kan that's the end of it. Ulfi zeh en mikan raya shetzarich l'shafshef shti yadav. So it says from according to this, there's no here proof that you really have to rub both your hands. Zo bezo b'shat netilat, at the time of washing. Ve'im zo hayta gamken kavanat Rambam, and this was also, if this was the impression of the Rambam, this was the intention of the Rambam. Tzarich tam lama beilchot berachot. So they have to have a reason why laws of blessings katav din zeh, he wrote this din belashon niguv, by saying that he dries the hands, right? Okay. Kedita pek kama de sota, like it says in the first pek of sota. Beilchot mikvot, laws mikvot. Katua lashon shifshuf kelashon shanui b'tosefta. So he says, then why did you use the language of rubbing? Because that's the language which have in the tosefta. Aval Rosh katav, but the Rosh says pek kol basar over there. Kelashon hazeh, he uses the language. והנוטל צריך שישפוך ידיו שישפוך אחר על ידיו. When you wash your hands, he says you have to pour another cup, whatever, another washing, another on his hands. If there's no other one, so then hold the vessel by way of the fingertips, and then pour it on both hands, or pour it on this one Revit, and also the other one Revit. Okay, and then you rub one against the other. So it says, seems from his words, that he seems to explain that which we learned in the Braita, that you have to rub. That means you have to rub two hands, one against the other. He also seems to say this way, it's Rabbi. Because he copied the Rosh language of the Rosh, and then he wrote that you should rub one against the other. So according to this, he says that we have a wonder. Let's Rambam. We have a wonder on the Rambam. That they left out this halacha altogether. In laws of blessings, because there's no logic to differentiate between eating truma, or eating the chulin. And we have to say, he says, he relied on what he wrote in laws of mikvot. So therefore he didn't bother to write it over here. Okay, that's the end of it. Phew. Mouthful. Wow. Look at this. Mouthful of Torah. Ooh. Okay. Good. So let's see Shulchan Aruch here. Right, so it says here like this. Natal shtei yadav zo le'atzmo. Let's say you wash two hands, right? Each one separately. Like we all do. So then he kind of changed his mind. Right? So what happened was that now that he is doing the second pouring, he touched one hand with the other, right? And he then did both of them in one shot. So here he's impure. Why is that? When he combined his hands one with the other, to receive the second pouring, so then what happened was that the hands became impure by way of them touching one the other. Because what happens is that the water which is on this hand defiles the water on the other hand, and also the hand, when he washed the second time, they did not purify the first one, because they became pure because of the other. Ela adraba, says on the contrary, says the second one was also disqualified, defiled here. So therefore he has to wash his hands, but he told Shtem Bechad and then washed them together in one shot. Okay, says the Rama, וכל שכן להיזהר שלא ייגע בידו ששפך עליה פעם אחת. All the more so, he says, you got to be careful not to touch the hand that he poured on one time. לידו השני to the second one, שפך עליה שתי פעמים, that he washed over there twice. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to review the Shulchan Aruch next time because, it's a little bit tricky. I want to make sure I get all the details. So, Bezrat Hashem, we'll review it next time. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chag Sameach. And Laila Tov, Chazak u'Baruch. We'll see you tomorrow, Bezrat Hashem, which is Hoshana Rabbah, tomorrow night, Hoshana Rabbah. Okay, Bezrat Hashem. So, God bless all of you.
Kavod Harav, thank you so
Chag
much.
Sameach.
Thank you.
Bye, Rabbi.
Bye.